What's going on, sartorialists? Welcome back to the Style. If you're new here, my name is Barry Ramirez. Welcome to the channel and thank you sincerely for watching. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, something I haven't done on this channel before. I'm going to give you guys a bit of a life update. For those of you who follow me actively on Instagram, you will know that I very recently moved from Bakersfield, California, all the way to Houston, Texas, because I got a full-time teaching position at Houston Community College. And what I want to explain to you today is how this happened because I read a single piece of literature. It's a folktale called Little John the Dauntless. I want to explain to you guys the story and what it means symbolically and talk about how it allowed me to transform my life with the hope that if you find yourself in a rut, feel like you're not accomplishing your goals, this will help you to do that. Without saying too much more, let's crack into it. The story of Little John the Dauntless goes like this. There was once a lad by the name of Little John the Dauntless who wafted fearlessly about the world. One day he found himself at an inn, and in speaking to the maid of the inn, he discovered that the inn was full. And the maid suggested that if he wanted to stay somewhere, he could go to a haunted palace which was just down the road. The problem with this haunted palace is that everybody who went to it eventually did not return. But Little John the Dauntless, being as fearless as he is, decided that he was going to gather together the instruments of courage, which are a sausage, a bottle of wine, and a lamp, and take the road to the haunted palace. So off he goes, and once he arrives, he's sitting before a fireplace, much like this one, having dinner, and he hears coming down the chimney a wobbly voice. It's the wobbly voice of a ghost that asks, "Can I throw it down?" To this, without even inquiring where the voice is coming from or who's saying it, Little John the Dauntless says, "Sure," and sips his wine. And down the chimney comes a leg. He hears the voice once again. "Can I throw it down?" He says, "Sure," and down the chimney comes another leg. He nibbles his sausage. Again, the voice comes down the chimney. "Can I throw it down?" "Sure," he says, and down comes the trunk. Eventually what happens is that this body assembles into a giant or an ogre. And this ogre tries to command Little John the Dauntless to do certain tasks. So at first, the ogre asks Dauntless Little John to walk before him while holding the lamp. Little John the Dauntless says to this, no. He does not take the commands of the ogre, and the ogre is forced to walk in front of him with the lamp. Now, eventually they find their way to a staircase, and at this staircase on the side, there's a door that leads down into the basement. The ogre asks Dauntless Little John to open the door and go down into the basement. To this, Little John the Dauntless responds, no. And eventually, the ogre goes down in front of him into the basement. When they get down into the basement, the ogre commands Dauntless Little John to lift up a tile, because underneath that tile there are 3 pots of gold. And Little John the Dauntless to this says, no. And eventually the ogre has to get the pots of gold from under the tile. Then the ogre commands Dauntless Little John to take these pots of gold up the stairs to the fireplace. And to this, what do you think Little John the Dauntless says? He says no. And eventually, when they get to the fireplace and Dauntless Little John has not taken a single command from the ogre tells him that the spell of the haunted palace is broken. And thereupon, his body dissembles and goes back up the chimney. And for this, Little John the Dauntless is rewarded with the 3 pots of gold and the palace. He has to disseminate the gold, first of all, to the friars who come and go to pick up the bodies of the other people who vanished when they went to the haunted palace. And he gets to keep one, and then he has to give one to the next person that stops at the palace. But Little John the Dauntless gets to keep the palace himself. So you might be wondering at this point, what the hell does this story mean? Well, if you examine it symbolically, it contains a very important maxim that you can apply to your life, and it's this. Little John the Dauntless, in the end of the tale, is able to be awarded, but the question is why? Why is he able to get the pot of gold and the palace? Why is he given the spoils? And it's because he is dauntless. He is fearless. The ogre in the story is a monster. It represents what most people fear. And Little John the Dauntless, throughout the tale, rather than being afraid of the ogre, like most people will or would be, he constantly denies it. He tells it no as it tries to command him to do what it is that it wants him to do. And of course, in the end, because he sticks to his gun, because he is courageous, he eventually is able to be rewarded. Now, this applies to your life as well, and it applied to mine, and I'm going to explain how. The idea is this, that if you allow fear to dictate, to demand who you are basically going to not get the rewards that you want in life. You cannot allow yourself to be dictated, like Little John the Dauntless wasn't, by fear, which is represented by the ogre. When I read this story 6 months ago, it was extremely profound for me once I understood its meaning, because I then began to almost ruthlessly examine my life and ask myself the question, in what ways am I allowing fear to dictate who I am? And one of the primary areas of my life where I felt that I was allowing fear to dictate who I am was in my career. As many of you know, excuse me, I am an English professor, and I have always wanted to get a full-time teaching position. And when I started to examine why it is that I didn't have the reward that I wanted, I found that there were areas where I was exhibiting cravenness. I was allowing fear to dictate my actions. In particular, I was afraid of the full-time interview process, which, if you don't know, is quite extensive. What it usually entails is teaching in front of 7 to 12, depending on the institution, professors at the college, and usually it also involves a meeting with the president of the college should you pass the first test, the first teaching demonstration. Now, this was always a source of trepidation for me, and for a long time, I did not apply for full-time positions because I didn't want to go through with that process. Now, of course, I was not thinking this consciously. It was just unconsciously I was allowing myself to be dictated by that fear by not trying to take the opportunity. But when I read this story 6 months ago, I decided that I wasn't going to allow fear to dictate who I was in this particular area of my life, in my career. And so I started applying to full-time positions across the nation, and in particular in Texas. And it's funny the way that it all worked out, because I originally had an interview at Odessa College in West Texas, and I was actually flued out for the interview. And I went through the interview and did quite well. At first I had to do a teaching demonstration in front of 7 of the professors at the college, and then I had a meeting with the president and those same 7 members of the college. And unfortunately, eventually what happened is that I didn't get the position. But on that very same day that I had the interview, I also had an interview at Houston Community College, but it was online. Now, it was 2 hours after my last interview for Odessa College. And what ended up happening is that I was so warmed up, if you will, from the previous 2 interviews that I did really quite well in the first interview. In the last interview. And what ended up happening is that I ended up actually getting the full-time position at Houston Community College, which is where I wanted to go anyway. And I eventually moved from Bakersfield, California, all the way to Houston, Texas. And now I have a full-time teaching position at Houston Community College. And at least in this area of my life, I have achieved what has been a lifelong dream for me. Now again, what does this have to do with you? What I would encourage you to do is ruthlessly examine your life and become more like Little John the Dauntless. Try to identify those areas in your life where you are allowing fear to dictate who you are. And then strive to overcome that. Strive to be courageous. Strive to take actions that are courageous, that are against your instinct of fear. Because in truth, it's only in not allowing the ogre of fear to dictate who you are that you can become the fullest and greatest version of yourself. And I want you guys to take that away with you today. So there you have it, sartorialist. I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a life update since it's been so long since I posted my last video. I hope that you guys are able to glean the lesson of Little John the Dauntless and you go forward boldly and courageously. Starting next week, I'm going to get back to the style stuff. This was just a little bit of a deviation. All that said, if you enjoyed this content, hit that like button, smash subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can be informed when I drop more videos on the Hulsey style very soon. Until next time, guys.